If you are an opposition leader in Venezuela and you are popular or your leadership qualities are evident, you are either legally disqualified by the government, your party is not allowed to run in elections, you are in jail, or you are in exile.
Chemical weapons attacks in Syria and an American response. In Hungary, Prime Minister Orban wins big yet again. In Brazil, President Lula is in jail. And in Washington, D.C., Mark Zuckerberg defends his way of life. I'm Ian Bremmer, and this is your GZERO World. Here in downtown New York City, we have Moises Naim, former Minister of International Trade for Venezuela, and now running Efecto Naim. Lots to talk about in South America and an imploding Venezuela with him. But for now, your world this week. Syrian chemical weapons attacks at this point look pretty decisively like they came from Assad. French President Macron saying indeed he has confidence and evidence of that. U.S. response, international response has not come yet as of this moment, but almost certainly will, and probably in military fashion. Remember, a year ago, Trump said, don't use those chemical weapons. If you do, I'm going to hit you. They did. He hit them. The Russians have said that they will respond this time around, but specifically, if you look at the statements from the Russians, it's if Russians are threatened. Well, Trump's already telegraphed to the Russians that he's going to go after Assad. If you're a Russian and you're in a military base right now, you're probably going to leave. And if you're Syrian and you see the Russians leaving your base, I'd probably follow them. Seems like a sensible move. The only question is what's it going to accomplish, right? At the end of the day, the United States does not have a mission in Syria. Assad is still in charge. ISIS is largely destroyed. But aside from that, we don't have a strategy in Syria. In Hungary, we have a big win for Viktor Orban, prime minister now for the third time. In election polls, they didn't say they were going to vote for Orban. They said they were going to vote for someone more respectable, someone more establishment. Happens all the time in the United States, in Italy, in the UK for the Brexit vote. Then they actually show up and they say, no, 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 I want this guy who's what I really feel like. In the case of Orban, he was going really hard against migrants, saying, sick of all these people. This was a big us versus them moment, right? My new book, Us versus Them, The Failure of Globalism, is almost out, but available now for pre-order in Amazon or any suffering bookstores near you. And in Brazil, we have presidential elections coming up. The big away from Lula in jail is that he's not going to be able to campaign for his Workers' Party, the PT, which means the left is going to get much more fragmented. You won't have an establishment left candidate that's going to win. You're much more likely to have candidates from the outside. The big news is not that Lula's in jail. The big news is after the most popular political official for years gets imprisoned, almost no social dissent, no violence, elections are moving ahead normally. The system is kind of working and the economy's picking up a little bit. Don't look at what's happening in Brazil, look at also what's not happening. And finally, I thought Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg did pretty well on the Hill this week. He's worth a few billion more than he was before. For a couple days' work, that's pretty honest. And if Mark doesn't make any big mistakes going forward, he's going to get off scot-free. In fact, he feels so good about this that he's now getting ready to roll out a couple new products. We've got a sneak peek on one with your puppet regime.
We're so excited here at Facebook to introduce a new interactive experience that you're all going to love. It's called Face to Face. You get to connect directly with your audience and tell them how you feel. Here's how it works. Hi Rick, my name is Mark. Give me your f***ing data.
This year we're meeting in Israel.
And I have with me in Washington, D.C. here, Moises Naim, distinguished fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's written 12 books on geopolitics. For over a decade, he was editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine. And back in the 90s, he was Minister of Development for Venezuela. Moises, wonderful to be with you.
Great to be here, Ian. Thanks for inviting me.
So I hate to say I didn't bring your last book down with me to D.C. I have it in New York, but I did have here in Washington, I have The Future of Power by Joe Nye, and I have The End of Free Market by me, which together you get The End of Power, which is your last book, my favorite, and was also, if I can say this, Mark Zuckerberg's first ever recommended book out there, popped as a consequence in a pretty big way.
There is a proliferation of people looking at what's happening to power. My own take, which is the end of power, is not that power is ending, power is there, is that what's happening is that power in the 21st century has become easier to acquire, harder to use, and easier to lose.
You were in government in Venezuela in the 90s. Chavez comes Now we have Maduro. How did we get to this disastrous point?
It is very important to remember that when President Chavez was in power, and oil was at more than $100 per barrel, Venezuela had already very damaging shortages of everything. There was already a crisis brewing that was, the revenues were there, but what was happening was that production, the number of barrels of oil produced per day was declining because of corruption, because of mismanagement, because of lack of investment, because of not running the oil company, the nationalized oil company, effectively. So Maduro did nothing. Maduro President Chavez died, and Maduro, it was anointed. Maduro was anointed by Chavez. Of course, there was an election to legitimize Maduro, and Maduro won, surprise, surprise. And then Maduro essentially has done nothing to change the policies that were initially launched by Hugo Chavez. So what we're seeing today is more a Chavez-made crisis than a Maduro-made crisis.
What's the world missing about Venezuela today? The
world is missing the extent of the crisis and the nature of the crisis, which is quite unique. In the last year, 3 out of 4 Venezuelans lost 22 pounds in weight because of hunger. Venezuela has the highest inflation in the world. It has hyperinflation. According to the IMF, in 2018, it's going to be 13,000%, and that is very hard even to imagine. It has one of the highest murder rates in the world. It is a failed state.
Under Chavez, Venezuela was democratic. The average Venezuelan would have supported his election. Under Maduro, you can't say that anymore.
The genius part of Chavez is that he made people, highly sophisticated people, believe that there was a democracy. He was the first. He was a pioneer in being an autocrat disguised as a democrat.
What needs to happen for the regime to start to actually crack? Because from the outside, at least, it doesn't appear that that's happening so far.
Countries never hit rock bottom. The notion that there is a floor, that countries decline and the problems become almost unbearable, and that therefore there is a tipping point. Well, no, you are a follower of geopolitics and politics around the world. You have seen many countries where you have said, wow, this cannot be sustained, and yet it continues to decline, and so it's very hard. Normally, what happens in this kind of regimes is that they start cracking when there is intra-elite conflict, where people that are running, it's not that there's an election and the opposition takes over and a more democratic opposition, more open to the world, takes over. No, that almost never happens. What typically happens is that the clique, the elite, the oligarchy that is in power starts fighting with each other, either for the spoils or, trying to control power or grab power from one another. And so that is when eventually things starts to fall apart for the elites.
This is already starting to affect countries around Venezuela, going beyond the borders. We see refugees in Colombia and in Peru and in Chile and in Brazil. Could we potentially see an equivalent to what we've seen out of Syria in the Middle East and in Europe?
Yes, without the chemical weapons and the bombings and the barrel bombs and the genocide.
Sure, but the refugee situation.
But in sheer terms of the numbers of people of Venezuelans that have emigrated, the numbers are more or less the same. It's about 4 million Venezuelans that are now sought refuge elsewhere.
What does it mean for countries around Venezuela?
They feel overwhelmed, as Jordan and Iraq and others and Lebanon have felt overwhelmed by the inflow of Syrian refugees. In this case is Colombia, big time, Brazil, big time. But even the tiny islands around Venezuela, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, people are taking rafts and very rickety boats and just going to these islands that are very, very small.
And the big demonstrations we see, is that just grassroots?
Those were student-driven protests. There were one of these new kind, Arab Spring kind of street marches in which they are spontaneous, there is no clear leadership, there is no structure or organization, there's not hierarchies. These are students, young people fed up, taking to the streets and confronting the riot police.
Now, the United States has imposed some sanctions. There's been talk about energy sanctions. Maybe Trump very briefly said maybe we could do the military option. He backed away from that. Is there anything credible the United States could do that would truly make a difference in Venezuela right now?
Well, Trump said that the military option was on the table, and that created in Venezuela a huge expectation, which was irresponsible. If you talk to the people at the Pentagon, and General Mattis has been very clear that he's very busy trying to organize for other potential military conflicts that are on the cards that are more directly related to the national interests of the United States and their present dangers.
Military is irresponsible, not going to happen. There's nothing you can do on the energy side. Is there anything left for the United States?
Yes, go after the money that they have stolen. We're talking about oligarchs that are Russia-sized. We're talking about government officials that have stolen and have accumulated fortunes that rank among the highest in the world.
Who have assets outside of Venezuela.
Hiding the assets, including in the United States, paradoxically.
And one country we haven't talked about in this constellation is China, which historically had provided an awful lot of credit for Venezuela. They're clearly getting less interested in doing so going forward. Are they a relevant player today in Venezuela?
They are, but much less than in the past. In the past, they were very effective and active funding the Venezuelan government. And Hugo Chavez was very persuasive, and he sold them oil. So there is a big part of oil committed to the Chinese. And because the Chinese bought it in advance and paid in advance. They have a huge problem with collecting their debts. I think they wrote off a significant part of the debts. But, China was essentially the best clients for Venezuelan oil, and then a very important financier. That's no longer the case. The other big player that is becoming more and more important, to everybody's surprise, is Russia. Who would have said, right? So during the Chavez regime, Russia was a very important supplier of arms. So Venezuela was essentially a client that bought their weapon systems. Then they had to pay for those, and then Russia started funding that and started creating financial mechanisms to get paid. That did not work perfectly, and there was a problem. So the government of Venezuela offered them to go and operate some of the oil fields that were not working well. And the Russian companies have tried to start operating some of the Venezuelan fields, but with no success. And now the Russians see an opportunity to create a Syria-like intervention.
Do you see the potential for a military base?
No, but why not having more Russian Navy vessels going to Venezuela to refuel and have a presence?
Such a pleasure to take a tour around the region with you. Moises Naim, the GZERO World. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
That's your GZERO World this week. Come back next week. We have Lara Satrakian. She's the founder of Syria Deeply, now News Deeply. Exactly the right person to talk to that deeply troubled corner of the world.